Hi there, this is Kalika. I'm here to teach you about After Effects sequencing today. Now this is kind of a basic tutorial. I'm going to show you around After Effects. I'm going to show you how to put your layers into an order so that they play back one at a time, and also how to have them play back so that they stack on top of each other, okay? Let me start by showing you the After Effects interface. So after you close up the welcome screen and all that sort of stuff, here's the After Effects interface, and I prefer to work in the standard workspace. Now, if your standard workspace looks different than my standard workspace, you can always click on the little 3-stack hamburger and choose Reset to Saved Layout. Alternatively, you can go to the Window menu, and in the Window menu, you can choose Workspaces. It's up toward the top. Workspace, and choose Standard. Now I like Standard because it doesn't have tons of windows in it, unlike like the Learn workspace, which has everything and all panels. Ooh, shoot, totally has everything. So Standard is just sort of the bare bones minimum. We're not working with text today, so I'm actually going to close up the little panels far on the right. And I did post the bit link in our chat, so if you click on the chat bit link and it doesn't work for you, please let me know and then I'll try and fix it. If you weren't able to download it, just put in a holler. All right, cool. So here's After Effects, and it's looking a little dark. You can always change your appearance by going to the Edit menu on a PC, or on a Mac, you can go to the After Effects menu and go to Preferences, and there's a thing called Appearance. And in Appearance, you can adjust the brightness of your interface, you can change the label colors, and so on, okay? And again, the files I'm gonna be using are in the YouTube chat, and if you have any issues with those, please just let me know in the chat. All right, so in Appearance, my brightness is turned way down, so I'm actually just gonna bring it up. Okay, up, come on. All right. Or I can click on Default, that can work too. Okay, and it's trying to like keep up. It's trying to brighten at the same time as like working really hard. Okay, here we go. So that looks better. And then the other one that I like to set when I'm doing this kind of work especially, okay, we are on a lag. Hold on just a second. This seems to happen every time I compliment my PC. It's like, oh gosh, I'm not all that great. And I'm like, no, you really are. And then it does this. Anyways, so in the general preferences, whenever I'm sequencing layers, I like to turn off this second preference. And the second preference is create layers at composition start time. And what that means is that if I'm, let's say, at like 5 seconds and I want to drop in a new image at that point in time, the image will start at 5 seconds if this is off. If it's set to this being on, the image will start at 0. I know, why would it do that? But anyways, so turn off this one, and like that's kind of it for preferences. But like so many things in After Effects, there are a number of like weird idiosyncrasies. So preferences are located there, but they're also located in one other spot, and that is the project settings. So in your File menu, you need to go to File, Project Settings, and in the Project Settings, go to Time Display Style and change your default base to 24. Yeah. And I also like to set it to frames. It just makes the math easier when you're doing the sequenced images. Okay, and then I hit OK to that. Now, before I do anything at all, I'm gonna save my project. Now, After Effects does have autosave, but it won't autosave unless you save first. Yeah, so if you're used to Premiere Pro won't even let you start working until you tell it what to save it as. And then it'll automatically start auto-saving after that. With After Effects, it'll let you work. It'll let you work for days, and then it won't auto-save anything, and you'll just be sad when your computer crashes or runs out of battery. Oh. So let's go to the File menu, and let's do Save As, which I know is kind of clunky. And then we're going to go to our wherever you're saving this stuff as, and I'm going to show you my preferred folder structure. Now, if you're one of my NYU Tisch students, you know I'm crazy about file organization, and that's because I don't like my software to lose its mind. After Effects, what I mean by losing its mind is that After Effects is it's a software that depends on specific files being where you originally had them. It references your images and audio files and videos. It does not embed them. So if you've ever tried to open an HTML document when you're offline and like it just comes up with these like file not found icons everywhere, you know what I'm talking about. So After Effects is like an HTML page without the web connection to the images. After Effects project files stay really, really small because they are simply referencing where those images originally came from. So what we need to do is create a little folder structure for them. So I'm going to create a new folder, and it's going to be called YT sequence. And inside of that, I like to make 3 new folders, and the 3 new folders are After Effects projects, assets, and exports. And it's a similar workflow if you're on a Mac. Just make sure that you have that little triangle turned on so you can see everything. So here's my assets, and I make another one folder, and this is going to be for my exports. Beautiful. I'm going to save my After Effects project to, you guessed it, AE project, and I'm going to give it a more clever name than untitled project. So I'm going to call this YT sequence project because we're on YouTube and it's a sequence. Then I hit save, and here we are in After Effects with a saved project. Okay, the next thing I like to do is to go into my preferences and just double check my autosave. So in the autosave preference, you can specify how many autosaved projects it's going to save for you, but it's also going to tell you how often it's going to autosave. Now, some people are like, yeah, we should totally save every minute, but After Effects is going to interrupt your work. So you're going to be working and it's going to be like, hang on, I need to save. And you're going to be like, oh, why? Why are you doing this to me? Because it can really interrupt your flow. So the default is like 15 or 20 minutes, which I find to be a really long time. But that's because I've been using the software for a long time, so a lot of things can happen in 15 or 20 minutes. I usually set it to about like 8 or 10, and then you should also save when starting the render queue. I like to auto-save next to the project, but what some people like to do is save it to a custom location. Now, I think this is actually kind of a smart idea because supposing your main folder fails, like your main drive fails, at least your project files are saved externally. They're saved somewhere else. So you could do custom location, and I have 2 hard drives on this laptop. I have a C drive and a D drive. So I would probably save it into my D drive, and then I have a folder in here sometimes called, I have one called Premiere Stuff, so maybe I'll do one called AE Autosaves. And remember, when it comes to digital files, it's not a question of if your hard drive is going to fail, it's a question of when. All hard drive fails. All hard drives fail. It's just a matter of when are they going to fail. And it's very sad when they fail, because if you don't have everything backed up in more than one spot, then you could lose some work, and that can be really frustrating. All right, so we've set our autosave. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to create a couple of folders over here on the left. Now, if you're one of my NYU After Effects, NYU Tisch animation students, I've got all this outlined in that document that I gave you for the flipbook or the stop motion. But I like that protocol. I think it works pretty good, especially with this. So I'm going to make two folders. One is going to be for comps, and the other one is going to be for elements. And you can make a new folder by clicking this little tiny new folder icon, and that's in the project window. Your project window is like your library. So everything you import into After Effects and almost everything that you create within the software itself ends up living in the project window. Okay, so I've made a comps folder. I'm going to make another folder and call it elements, and then I click off of it in order to deselect. Now, if you accidentally end up with one folder inside another, you can swivel that closed folder open and then just take this and like inside folder and just drag it all the way up. And you see how I have this little plus sign next to it? That means that if I drag it all the way up to the top, I can release, and it'll, you know, release it from the folder structure as well. So there's nothing currently in these folders. All right, I'm going to make another composition, and this composition is going to be called Render Girl. Okay, and the way you make a composition is this little button right down here. Now, I know there's this very tempting giant button in the middle of the screen, but this is a single-use button, meaning that once you start making compositions, this button goes away. So it's a good idea to know other ways of creating compositions before you start doing it. And a composition is simply a container that allows you to add different layered elements to it, like images, graphics, text, audio, video, and so on. Without a composition in After Effects, you can't actually export anything. You can't actually make a video without a composition. So it's really important to make a composition. So with nothing selected in my project window, I'm going to click on the Create New Composition icon in the project window, and then under Composition Name, I'm just going to call it Render Girl. And I am going to be using those images from our assets folder that I shared with you guys in the chat. Okay. And under preset, I'm going to choose HDTV 1080-24 because that's what I want for my output. It's going to be 1920 by 1080 pixels, width by height, and it's going to be 24 frames per second. Now, when you choose a preset, it automatically populates everything up at the top of the composition settings window. And then there's this line, right? And then below the line, you can continue to make changes. So I'm going to set the resolution to full, and I'm going to set the duration to like 1,000 frames, which is really, really long, but that's okay. All right. So I have everything set up here. Now, if you were making something for Instagram, you would need to change these settings. You would unlock the aspect ratio, which allows you to change both of these numbers independent of one another. And you would change the width to 1080 and leave the height as is. Okay, and notice this has now changed where it says preset to custom. Now, if you're doing a lot of stuff for Instagram, it might be a good idea to make an Instagram preset because as you can see when you click the little downward arrow, there is no inherent Instagram preset in After Effects because Adobe didn't get the message that people use in Instagram, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, we click on this little icon here if we want to make a new preset. For this project, I'm going to stick with the HDTV 1080-24, but if you ever needed to make a preset, just click this little guy and then it lets you name it and then fabulous happy. All right, so and then it'll show up in the list. All right, awesome. So that's ready to go. And it always flashes an image of the last comp I was working on. So if you're using a public or shared computer, it'll flash the last image that somebody else had been working on. It's a really weird bug. I've seen it happen on Mac and PC. it's been going on for like a year at least. It's super weird. All right, so any questions so far, please feel free to drop them right into the chat, okay? All right, so next I'm gonna select my elements folder, and in the meantime, I'm gonna do a little bit of housekeeping in my Finder or Windows Explorer. So my boxes element, I'm gonna put that into AE Basic Sequencing, and I see that I have in this folder my YT sequence. I'm gonna drop boxes right into it, okay? Then I'm gonna double click on that YT sequence folder structure that I made, and I'm gonna drop boxes into the assets. I also need to go over to my flipbook images and drop that in as well. So here we go. We have abstract and jumping jacks, and I'm just going to copy them, Command or Control C, and I'm going to move them over to my YouTube sequence folder. Okay, there's assets, and I'm just going to paste those in there. So this way, everything is in the assets folder before I import it, because otherwise we're going to end up with like a mess, right? After Effects is going to always look for my files in the downloads folder. Oh, hey, Austin. Thanks for joining. All right, so we have Austin Saylor joining us from Full Harbor. He's also a brilliant freelancer, and he's on a mission to make $200,000 as a freelancer in motion design this year, and he is killing it. It's really cool. Check him out on Instagram, and he's pretty active on Twitter as well, and he has a really cool website, fullharbor.com, and I'll link you guys in the description if you're interested in the Full Harbor program. All right, I'm a member. I love Full Harbor. They're my peeps. Okay, so here we go. We have all of our assets in the assets folder, and then we have our After Effects project in the After Effects projects folder, and eventually we're going to export into exports. Okay, we're ready to import. I'm going to select my elements folder, and I'm going to go to the File menu in After Effects and go File, Import File. Okay, now again, if you have any questions just drop them into the chat, and I'll be happy to answer those questions as they come up. Fabulous. So I'm gonna go over to my YT sequence folder, gonna go over to assets, and you can actually import like a whole folder of stuff. So I'm gonna select on Anika Jumping Jacks, and I'm gonna hit import folder, and it's the same on Mac and PC. Now, one thing that's really important, friends, is you wanna make sure that like down here, you have all these options and that none of the checkboxes are turned on. Now, if you're not seeing the options, you're probably on a Mac, and that means you need to click the little options button, and that's gonna bring up the options, and then you'll be like, oh, look, there are options. Uncheck everything. Bring in the whole entire folder like this. There we go. There's Anika Jumping Jacks. That's my daughter. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these guys and we're going to make a brand new comp out of it. And the reason for this is that I want to eventually turn this into a loop. So I'm going to take all these pictures, click the first one, shift click the last one, and I'm going to drag them down to the new composition icon, okay? And that is going to make a new composition based on what I dragged to it. Now, if you had a video and you dragged that to the new composition icon, it'll create a new composition with just your video, and it'll match the settings of the video, which is really great. It matches the frame rate, all this kind of stuff. But if you drag a bunch of images to it, it brings up this question box. And the question box is new composition from selection. And it assumes that each of your images has different dimensions, which in this case, they don't. They're all the same. Use dimensions from the first one. Fine, I don't care. We want a single composition though. We don't want each of these pictures in a separate container. We want them all in one, okay? So single composition. Still duration. I'm actually gonna make this like really long, like longer than it needs to be. So I set it to 2 seconds, all right? And that's what this 2:00 means. It means 2 seconds and 0 frames. None of the checkboxes. Turn all that ish off and hit OK. Here we go. All right, so what that did was it created a composition that has all of the images stacked because I turned off the sequence option, and it put that composition into the Elements Annika Jumping Jacks folder. So I'm going to drag that composition into the Comps folder instead. Makes sense, right? And I'm going to rename this Annika JJ. And see, it updated down here. That was an autosave. Did you see that? It like popped up and it was like all quiet and stuff. All right, so this down here is our timeline. This up here is our composition viewer. Some people call it the comp viewer. Some people call it the stage. But this is where you should see your whole animation play through. Now there's a couple of gotchas when it comes to working with the composition viewer. If you accidentally double click one of your images, you're going to see it stacked like right on top usually of your composition viewer, and then when you play back you aren't going to see your actual animation. You're just going to see that one picture in isolation. Okay, so if that happens to you, just locate up here where it says layer blah 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 and look for the little X and close the X. Okay, so here we are back in the timeline. Now, if I take this little blue thing, the blue thing is our playhead slider. If I drag that across, you'll see that, well, nothing's happening. And that's because all of our layers are on top of each other. Imagine we have a stack of photos and they're all just like stacked together perfectly. You're only going to be able to see the one on top. And that's why we're only able to see frame 00. Over on the left, we can turn on and off the visibility and we can see that, oh, look, there are other pictures underneath. So the names of our layers are on the left. You can change the names just by hitting the Enter key and typing in the name and hitting Enter again to lock it in. We're not going to do that. Over here, we have a number of different columns. This column that's showing for me is called the blending modes column and the blending modes and track mat. Some people just call it modes. And there's this very poorly designed button at the bottom. If I just click that one time, we go back to switches. Look at that. And so now we have a bunch of like quality switches, motion blur, and so on. I prefer having this. Okay, so if you're seeing these different columns, mode T track mat, just click down where it says toggle switches and modes, and it'll go back to just showing your switches instead. Up here we have parent and link. We don't need that. So I can right click right where it says parent and link, or control click if you don't have a 3-button mouse, and choose hide this. Okay, and you can do that with any of the other columns with the exception of your AV controls, your label, numbers, layer source name, and switches. Okay? And if you're missing any of them, you can always right click up here, go to columns, and then bring them back just by clicking on the one that you need. So right now we have AV features, label, number, layer name, which you can't turn off, and switches. Fabulous. Okay, so these little guys over on the right, these bars, these are known as layer content bars. And if I move the layer content bar from the center, notice that the beginning lopped off section moves over with it, and the end lopped off section is also moving with it. This is what's known as shifting a layer, okay? And in doing so, we reveal the layer underneath. So if I just advance by a couple of frames, you can now see the second layer followed by the first layer. Now the thing to keep in mind with After Effects is that layer number is less important than layer appearance. It's all about what is currently under your playhead. So if the layer content bar for layer 1 is not visible under your playhead, or if there are any keyframes or properties like details about the layer that have changed it so it's not visible, you're going to see the stuff underneath instead. Okay, so these are your layer content bars. I sometimes call these nuggets because depending on like their duration, they look like little tiny nuggets, and you can move them and you can like shuffle their timing and stuff like that. It's pretty nice. Okay, So what we want for this one is we want each of these images to last for 2 frames, and then we want it to go backwards again. So it's going to go forwards and then backwards. All right. So I click on the first image and I scroll down and I shift click on the last image. And this is important because the order in which you select your layers does matter. And then I'm going to shorten the end all the way to 2 frames. Now, how do I know what 2 frames is? Well, I'm so glad you asked. You take your little zoom slider and you drag that to your right. And I can see now that this actually lasts 3 frames. Look at this. 0 to 1 is 1 frame. 1 to 2 is 2 frames. 2 to 3 is 3 frames. Okay? So this is like the last day of the year, and then this is the new year. Okay, so I'm just going to shorten this up. And again, if you have any questions at all, just drop them into the chat. If you're watching the replay, drop them into the comments and I'll be happy to answer. Okay, so once everything is shortened to only last 2 frames, they're still all stacked on top of each other. So we need to tell After Effects, hey man, can you like just show us these one at a time? So you're going to go to the animation menu, you're going to go to Keyframe Assistant, and you're going to go to Sequence Layers. Now, those of you who've used After Effects before, you're probably like, wait a second, these aren't keyframes, Kalika, they are layers. I don't know why they put this here, but they did. Sarite. So just remember, Animation, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers, okay? No overlap. We want them to play one at a time. The overlap thing is nice, like if you want it to kind of like very softly fade from one image to the other, almost like a time lapse. Like supposing you took a picture of yourself every year for 30 years, maybe you would want that sort of morphing to happen, but we don't want that. I hit okay. Look at this. Oh my gosh, she is staggered, or rather all of them are staggered. There we go. So she does a single jumping jack, and to play it back, I just hit the space bar. And that looks like a pretty complete loop. Let's scroll down and locate that last picture. Okay, and the key command to shorten your layer to this very last frame, and you have to be able to actually see the last frame, okay? It can't be black. So I see the last frame. I've parked my playhead right on the very last frame of animation. I'm just going to hit the letter N. N for end. I know, that's like terrible phonics. And then if I hit the space bar, I should be able to see it play back. And you can always tell if it's playing back at real time, or like the actual timing of your export, or what your export's going to be, by checking out the info window. And that looks pretty good, aside from the fact that I didn't use a tripod. Yeah, I know, I should have had some sort of a registration system. But this isn't too bad. It's a pretty good loop. Now, supposing I wanted to pause, because she has a little smile that she does, right? If I wanted to pause on the smile, this is the smile. So what I could do is I could extend this photo to maybe last like 8 or 10 frames. Heck, I could even have it last 12 frames. Why not? And then I could take all these other guys and have them go afterwards. But let's suppose you also wanted to extend another frame. So I just turned off the visibility of that first one so we can see everybody underneath. Like suppose I wanted her to pause at the bottom of her movement as well. Not a lot, but maybe like 5 or 6 frames. Okay, so we got 6 frames here, from 12 to 18. Now it gets more complicated, right? So if you were trying to move these nuggets, you would be like, oh boy, this is starting to get confusing. After Effects has got your back. Don't worry. All you got to do is select the first layer. Let me turn on its visibility again. Scroll down, shift select the last layer, and then go to the animation menu once more, Keyframe Assistant, Sequence Layers. And like magic, it'll put them in order, end to end. No overlap again, end to end, keeping in mind that some of your images are lasting longer. So I'm just going to expand the timeline so that you guys can see it fill up the whole screen. And to do this, you're going to go on your keyboard. If you're using a standard keyboard, directly below the escape key is a squiggle. That's known as a tilde. If you have a friend who's time casual, they might use this when they are talking about what time they're going to meet you. They might say like, I will meet you at squiggle 11, and that could mean anything between like 10:50 and like 11:35. So if I hover my mouse down here and I hit the tilde key, it's going to expand my timeline to fill the whole frame. Now I'm still not seeing the whole duration of my animation, and I know this because if I look at the very top here, you see this like thin gray bar with like the blue on the sides. This is showing me what portion of the overall timeline I'm looking at. I also am observing that down at the bottom, there's a little scroll bar, which also tells me that, hey, you're not seeing the whole thing. And I'm remembering that I had made my composition like 200 or 300 frames. And if I look up here, the count ends at 22. So I'm going to go back down to my mountains and just drag my mountains to the left a little bit until I can see the end of my lowest layer in the list. Okay. Another thing that, oh, sorry, let me just, first things first, let me shorten this so it ends right here. I'm going to hit letter O to get to the out point of that layer, and then I'm going to hit letter N to set the end point of the layer. Okay, I'm sorry, the end point of the work area. And then I hit the tilde key again, and it goes back to the standard workspace. So the tilde key will expand any window to fill the whole frame. All right, so then if I press the space bar, it's going to play back with the little pause at the top and the bottom. Another thing that can be really helpful when it comes to working with your layered sequences is to color code. So if you select a bunch of images in the middle here, like these guys, you could go over to this little luggage tag section and just click the little chip there, and it'll give you a list of colors. And now I can choose like green, and then at a glance I know that this is showing me what images are going down. All right, so the next thing I'm going to show you is how to put this into our render comp. And if I throw this into my render girl, right here in the project window, see that? I'm just dragging it into render girl. I have the whole thing there, but notice after it plays back, there's a bunch of black. So we actually need to shorten this composition to only last as long as the frames in it. Okay, so if you're happy with the timing of your overall animation and you've set your work area to end at the last image, all you got to do is composition menu, trim comp to work area. Okay, so now I have my little nugget here and it ends right there. And the cool thing is that I can duplicate this multiple times and have it repeat a few times before I have the whole thing end. So I could take this whole nugget, and this is what's known as a pre-comp or a nested comp. It's basically a composition that's inside of another one. And I'm just gonna go to Edit menu, Duplicate. And I can do this maybe like 4 times. And this is nice because then you don't have to deal with like 1,000 layers. You can just do it all with like little packets of layers. Okay, so now I have all these guys: animation, keyframe assistant, sequence layers. And now these are in order. So if I play that back, there we go. Now I may not want it to be that timing, in which case I could go back in and I could make changes. Now if you wanted it to be a little bit different every time she does the jumping jacks, this pre-comp method isn't really for you. I would suggest using a different method. Once you have your animation in your render comp, you would just select the very last nugget, hit letter O, hit letter N on your keyboard, and that is going to set the end of your work area, and then you could simply go to composition, add to render queue. Okay, And After Effects can't natively export MP4s, so you would have to click on the Q in AME button, and that's going to take you to Media Encoder. Okay, it's going to launch the software, and then you can export using that. The next thing I'm going to show you after Media Encoder, friends, is I'm going to show you how to work with those flipbook images, and then I'm going to show you how to stack the images so that they come on top of each other, okay? And so, yeah, we might go a couple minutes after 11. You've been warned. All right, so here's Media Encoder, and in Media Encoder, there are a number of different presets, but usually the default preset works pretty well for us. So here's Render Girl. This is my loop from yesterday. Yes. Here's Render Girl. And if you go to Window, Workspace's Default, and then if default looks funky, go to Revert. There we go. And then down at the bottom is your preset browser. So I would just type in YouTube, go to the 1080p, and just drag that right on top there. And then you have to tell it where to save. And the way that you tell it where to save is by clicking this last section here, which is Output File, okay? And in your Output File section, you're gonna go to your YT sequence folder, you're going to go to exports, and you're going to save it right in there. Okay? Cool. Finally, to start the export, you'll click the little play button. Fabulous. So that is going. I'm going to go back to After Effects. I'm going to save my project, and then I'm going to import my flipbook. So I'm selecting the Elements folder once more, File, Import, File, and I'm going to import my sequence of images which were shot with Stop Motion Studio of my flipbook. Now my flipbook, I didn't draw everything. There were like a few things that I wasn't really sure of the timing, so I numbered everything in the corner. Ooh, that's not the right one, is it? Nope. Hold on. Here we go, YT sequence. And then here are my assets. And I'm going to select this folder called Abstract. I'm going to import that folder. Here it comes, and it should end up right in my Elements folder. Okay. And again, if you have any questions, just drop them into the chat. And if you're watching it after the fact, you can drop them into the comments. Okay, so here are my abstract images. Oh no, are these are also 1920, 1080. Bummer. I had set it to 4K. What gives? Anyways, so these are, really I'm just trying to time these out. I'm trying to figure out what the proper timing is for them. So I'm going to select all of them. And I can see that my first image was really just my viewfinder. If I double click, I can see it in isolation mode here. And then I can select my first picture and then shift select my last picture after the viewfinder, and then drag those to the new composition icon. And I'm going to make a single comp, no sequencing. I'm going to set the still duration this time to like 6 seconds. 6:00 is 6 seconds, 0 frames. And then that's going to put them all in order end to end. Okay, and well, sorry, not end to end. It's going to put them all in one comp stacked because I didn't tell it to sequence yet. And if you need to change your composition settings after the fact, like supposing you observe that over here it doesn't say 24 frames per second, you can always go back to your composition menu, go to composition settings, and then change your frame rate here to 24. Also, if you're seeing time code instead of frames, you can hold the Command or Control key and just click, and it'll take you, so if you're on a PC, it's Control, if you're on a Mac, it's Command, and it'll let you go back and forth between frames and time code. Okay, so I had timed this out at about 2 drawings per, 2 exposures per drawing. Okay, that means that each drawing is going to last on screen for 2 frames at 24 frames per second. So I'm just shortening all their butts. Now you always want to make sure you get that double-ended arrow at the end. Otherwise you're not actually shortening it, you're shifting it. So it's going to be like, I don't know, the 6-second long clips, and that's not good. So you got to get that double-ended arrow. That's money right there. And then we have all these guys, and I've got to click the first one, scroll down, shift click the last one, and then do my sequencing. There we go. No overlap, and it's sequencing all those guys. And if I press the space bar, it's going to play them back. And it's not playing it at real time, it's playing it much, much slower than real time. If that happens to you, you might want to change your resolution here. This is like the playback resolution. It's not going to affect how it looks when you export. This is just for you while you're working. It's like your appearance. I'm going to set that to 1/4 and make sure my zoom is set to fit. And let's just shorten this so it ends on the last image, selecting the last image, hitting letter O, letter N, and then spacebar. And it's still not playing real time, and it's probably because I'm streaming. And you see these little numbers in the corner? These are key. This is so that I could figure out my timing, because I thought that they should have like more space on some of them, okay? So what I'm gonna do is, like, these are on 2s, right? So this was frame number 5. It's actually showing up. So this is frame number 1, okay? You can change the numbering if it makes more sense with your drawings, because number 1 lasts for 2 frames, and then we're on number 2, but we're at 2 frames. It's like, whoa, what is this? So if you go to your composition settings, you can actually change your start frame. So I'm going to change my start frame to 1 because that's how I counted these frames. So we go 1 to 3, and then we have frame 2, and so on. Okay, so there's 3, there's 4, and it's like a little bit more logical maybe. There's number 5. It's starting on frame 9 and 10, and then I do actually start like skipping through frames. You can step frame by frame by holding the command key on a Mac and your right arrow to go forward a frame, command left arrow to go back a frame. On a PC, it's just shift instead. So right here we jump. We went from 11 to 12 to 20. Okay, so what that meant was I wanted to add more drawings in there. Okay, so if this guy is right here and it's starting on, let's say, frame 24, I want this to be at frame 20. So maybe what we can do here, let me just think out loud. So this was done assuming 12 frames per second, right? That's our effective frame rate. So what I could do is actually go into composition settings and change my frame rate from 24 to 12. There we go. All right, and then I can move all these guys back and shorten them to last only 1 frame. So to call all your layers to start at the beginning, just hit the left square bracket. So if you look on your keyboard, just to the right of letter P is a square bracket, and that'll bring all your layers to start wherever your playhead is. And then I'm just going to zoom in here, and yep, they each last a frame, and that's going to make it a little easier for me. And then I also want to go to composition settings and change that first frame to 1 so that my counting is going to be a little bit easier. Okay, and then I'm going to animation, keyframe assist, sequence. Yes, okay. So this is going to make it much easier. So again, I changed my frame rate to 12 frames per second. And if you're editing in Premiere Pro, you can still put this QuickTime into 24 frame per second sequence in Premiere Pro, and Premiere Pro will, it'll get it. It'll catch the memo. So here's drawing number 12. Drawing number 12 is actually showing up at 12 frames. And then my next drawing, remember, was drawing number 20. So I want that guy to start at 20 frames. And sometimes it can be helpful to bring up the column called in. And I'm going to select all these guys. And I'm just going to shift this over until the in column on frame 13, which I know it's a little confusing. When Stop Motion Studio captured these pictures, it captured them in order, and it didn't, like, there was kind of no way to renumber it. So this is drawing 12. This here was drawing 20. You see that? And then the next one is drawing 24, so I actually want that to start at 24 frames. So what you can do is you can just click into here and type in where you want that to start. And then see how it shifted? And then I can hover over the end of the previous and make that last until drawing 24. Okay, and then this guy, if I double click it, I can see that is not the right one. Okay, this is number 36, I think. Let's just change the resolution. That was weird. It like showed me the other stop motion. So right here, this is drawing number 38. So this guy, I can click here in the in column. And with the in column, you always want to click and type. You don't want to like scrub, because if you scrub, sometimes like weird things happen. So I'm going to set this to 38. See how that's going? Double click this guy and it's going to tell me that one's 44. And the reason why I'm double clicking, friends, is because I can't see them otherwise. They're like obscured by other layers sometimes. And this way I can just like retime the ones that I need to. Okay, so this is going to be the last one that I do. And then I simply extend these previous endings to match up with the new timings. Okay, and this is a nice way of kind of doing like figuring out your timing on things like a flip book, or if you do an animation in Procreate, you can figure out how many more drawings you need in the middle and things like that. Okay, so yeah, so now I have like these certain things happening. And another way that I might use this would be to like maybe I want to do this as a frame by frame animation in Photoshop, and this is just a guide that I'm using, and so I want to paint over this in Photoshop, but I need the timing to match what I intended. Okay, so in a later episode I'll show you how to paint frame by frame in Photoshop. It's super fun. So at any rate, once you have these wackadoodle timings, then you can select your first image, shift select your last image once more, and go back and do that same thing. Sequence layers. Okay. Close up your layer view always, and then you can go to your very last image in the list, hit letter O, letter N, and then you can export this just as is, because I'm not planning on looping it, and I'm basically done. Like, the only reason I put the stop motion loop of Annika into another composition was because I wanted it to repeat a bunch of times. So I can take this one right here and I can just call it abstract render dash abstract, and I can just drag that all the way up to release it from the folder structure. And now if if I swivel this guy closed, I have render abstract and render girl, and I can just follow the same protocol for exporting the render abstract sequence as I did for render girl. Okay, so now comes the fun part, right? So I had created at the beginning of this live stream this illustration of just this stack of boxes, and I cut it up frame by frame so that it kind of looked like it was building on. And that can be kind of a fun way of revealing an illustration, or as a way of transitioning into a new shot in a film, things like that. So I'm going to show you how to do that kind of a building on in After Effects. So let me just save my project, and this shouldn't take longer than just about 5 minutes. I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm going to go to Import File. And this time we're going to import a layered Photoshop document. And the way I'm going to do it is very specific because I want to be able to have the flexibility to make changes. And there's one particular way of importing your layered files that allows for that flexibility. So here's my boxes PSD. And down in the options, you want to make sure your options are showing, right? So like make sure you click on that little options button, go to import as composition, and then click on import. Now there's like about 5-6 different ways of importing stuff into After Effects, but importing a layered file as a composition allows you to go back into that Photoshop file, make changes to existing layers, and they're going to update in After Effects without shifting. So whenever I'm working with artwork that's not final, that might require some changes, like for example a product where they haven't decided on the logo for it yet, who knew? So that we can put that element in later on, sometimes I'll import as composition. So there we go. And when we import it, it comes in as 2 separate things. You're going to end up with a folder and a composition. So this is the Are You Sure window, merge layer styles into footage, okay. And what you end up with are 2 things. So I have this composition ready to go called boxes, and then I have this folder called boxes layers. Inside of boxes layers are all the layers that I was working with in Photoshop. This composition is referencing those layers, so please don't throw them away. Drag that folder into your elements folder instead. Now for this, I have this box photo underneath. I'm going to turn that off. And then I have all of these lines, and I want the lines to draw on starting with pure white. Okay, I'm going to leave the white background as is, so I'm going to just lock the white background. And then I'm going to select these, but the way I'm going to select them is from the bottom on up. And that's because I want the bottommost layer to draw on first, or show up first. Okay, and it remembers the order that you selected them, even though you do a bunch of steps in between. So I'm just shortening it using the double-ended arrow. I'm zooming in until it lasts. So I'm going to do 3s for this. And then I'm going to do my animation, keyframe assistant sequence, no overlap. And I'm going to play this back, but it's going to look really stupid. You ready? Like, yeah, what the hey, this is not right. Right? It's just like flashing all over the place. It doesn't make any sense. So what I got to do is I got to extend all these guys to last longer. So I want this whole shot to last about 3 seconds. 3 seconds. So 3 times 24. I just think of it in terms of like a quarter. So like a second is about 25 frames. So this is going to be about 75 frames. So then with all of them still selected, I'm going to hit the following key command, okay? And I honestly don't know any other way to do it. So I'm going to go low tech right here and just draw for you what that key command is. It's Option, and while holding Option, you're going to hit the right square bracket, okay? So not the left square bracket, which is immediately after letter P, but the one after that, All right, so I go back to After Effects, and with all those layers selected, Option, or on a PC, it's going to be Alt, right bracket, and it just extends everybody. And then I'm going to hit letter N to end my work area, and just hit space bar, and it's going to play it back. And it's not playing back at real time, but you kind of get the idea. Like all these different little pieces are just sort of showing up. So this can be kind of a nice transition. Like imagine if you had like a character and you wanted to show it, you know, piece by piece appearing on the screen, or you had a landscape and you wanted each element of the landscape to appear on screen. You could have each of them as a separate layer and then use the sequencing followed by extending all of them with our good old Option right bracket to keep them on screen as additional layers add up. Okay, so that's pretty much it. And then you would, of course, do your export after that. If you liked the video, make sure that you give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. And if you have suggestions for any future videos, please type them into the comments or into the chat. I hope this was helpful, and I can't wait to see you again. I will be on again on Saturday at 9 a.m. I'm doing Photoshop digital painting, Saturday, 9 a.m. Eastern Time. And I hope to see you soon. All right, thanks everyone. Bye.